attempt number 27. So, yeah, Bruce, I've been doing this for a bit now, and I've never, ever, ever, ever had a seamless log on. Instagram doesn't do that.
No.
So anyway,
we've made it.
It doesn't matter. The important bit is the conversation, which I'm sure clever people will be able to book in, and it'll be great. It'll be great. Anyway, thank you for your patience. 15 minutes late. I apologize profusely. So, I mean, lots of questions. We're not going to get through all of them, obviously, but there's so much to talk about in the waste and recycling industry. And the first bit is, how's it going with First Mile? You guys are a lead indicator for the economy, in my view. How are you seeing things?
Well, it's been an interesting 18 months, and our client base is office, retail, and hospitality. Everything has come roaring back, really, apart from offices, and offices are slowly getting busier, but there's still lower footfall in offices. So we are doing really well, and getting busier. We've got, like everyone else at the moment, supply chain issues with shortage of HGV drivers. We actually, after we voted to leave Europe, we set up a driver academy where we train our own in-house drivers, from having a car license through to having a full HGV license. And we had to shut that down during COVID, and we restarted that in January because we knew that there was going to be a shortage of drivers, because there's been a structural shortage of HGV drivers for 8 years. So that's going well, but slow. Other than that, we're roaring away. And the great news is that in so many areas during the COVID period, we've got this renewed and invigorated interest around the environment and doing the right thing. And First Mile is never more relevant. I mean, I've been doing this sustainability game for about 30 years now, and we've had a few sort of false dawns where people have got a bit excited, and then the sort of climate deniers and doomsters have come along and sort of dampened everything down. But I think we've now got unstoppable momentum, and the services that we offer businesses are super relevant at the moment. Recycling is a key part of the circular economy, and a key stepping stone towards true circularity, where you wouldn't actually, in the dream scenario, you don't even need recycling because everything's going round in the circular economy. But we're some way away from that, and recycling is a key building block towards that circular economy. So yeah, it's going really well. Thanks, Mark.
Brilliant. Now, I know. I mean, First Mile, you've been there for, you set it up 17 years ago. I mean, there must have been an unbelievable number of blockers. I mean, I've tried to work with the waste industry, and it's a tough game. So I mean, the learnings to share on how to keep going, and what kept you going on the path.
Sure. I mean, we called First Mile because it's actually, when I set the business up, it was the project name for the business, and then I got all my friends who worked in branding and marketing and advertising to come up with a great name for me, and they drank all my wine and ate all my food and still couldn't come up with a good name. So we stuck with the project name, and it is really about doing the first mile of the logistics challenge. So there's lots of challenges in the recycling supply chain, and we're very much focused on the customer and getting the customer to do the right level of segregation. And we're all about debunking myths around recycling, giving customers the information they want, because it is relatively complex, recycling. It's not that complicated, but it's relatively complex, and there's legislation around it. So we take that pain away from customers, but it's fundamentally, we're giving great advice, delivering a great service, and data and reporting to tell people what their achievements are. And that sounds relatively easy, and it's relatively easy if you know what your product is, or your SKUs are, or what you're delivering in. But actually, from waste, by its very nature, it's not measured, and by its very nature, you don't know what you're going to collect. So there's a huge amount of complexity in, you might have a large business such as Tesco saying our stores are very complicated because we've got 80,000 SKUs in the store, but we've got Tesco's 80,000 SKUs plus Lidl's plus Aldi's plus Amazon's plus XYZ. So we've got everybody's end-of-life products and packaging coming at us in any shape or order mixed together. So it's pretty complicated business, and gets more complicated and gets more challenging as more weird and wonderful things are invented that are shoved through our linear economy, and we're expected to deal with it at the end. So there's a whole bunch of blockers, largely around sort of knowledge, and people either think recycling is so complicated they're not going to do it, or oversimplify it, and then we end up with problems. So there's a big knowledge gap, and that knowledge gap is sort of embedded in the linear economy, because why would you bother having data on something that you're just going to throw away?
There's a massive trust issue on recycling. You know, various people like Hugh Fernley, Whittingstall, showing Sainsbury's and Tesco's bags and some Filipino island being burnt and chucked in the sea. I mean, people go, should they do it or shouldn't they do it? How do we marry up the break in trust and knowledge, I suppose?
The fundamentals are around trust, is having a robust framework in what we're trying to deliver and how we deliver that. And the main reason that we're getting plastics turning up in Malaysia and China and the Philippines is because the regulatory framework here in the UK promotes exports of waste. And there's nothing wrong with exporting recycled commodity. That happens and should be encouraged to happen, because balance of trade, we buy things that are made in other countries. But what we shouldn't be doing is sending loads of material for recycling that's got 30 or 40% contamination in it, that is then going to get removed in Malaysia, in a country or wherever the country is, where they don't have formal or particularly good residual waste treatment facilities. And that's why it ends up getting burnt in the open. What we should instead be doing is investing in domestic recycling, and then sending out, in the case of plastic, we should be sending out clean plastic pellet with a high recycled content to be consumed around the world. And that's a very simple policy change, which would immediately give people the trust that we're managing their waste in an appropriate way. Because the crazy thing is, the first rule of waste management isn't collection or sorting or recycling. The first rule of waste management is containment. And this is why we've got a problem with plastics in the ocean, is because all of the plastic, or the vast majority of plastic in the ocean, is coming from countries where they've not containing the waste in the first place. So you need to contain the waste. You need to stop this leakage into the ecosystem. We've got fantastic rules in Europe and in the UK for doing that. And then we jeopardize them all by saying, well, we're collecting for recycling. It's potentially contaminated recycling because we're exporting difficult waste streams like mixed plastics, and exporting it to countries where it's potentially going to leak into the environment. So we're sort of shooting ourselves in the foot from a trust perspective. And the other thing that we need to really get straight on is things like on packaging, on product and on packaging labeling. The public are massively confused about what can and can't be recycled. We've got very low levels of knowledge around different polymer types, different cardboard types. And this situation is actually getting worse at the moment, because we've got now UK standards, now that we've left Europe, around what we're going to put on our packaging. So that's going to be different to when you're in Europe, or if you're importing products from Europe. And also we're getting increasingly novel types of packaging coming through the supply chain, which to the untrained eye look exactly the same. You know, bioplastics. Coca-Cola saying it's brilliant because we're going to move to selling drinks in cardboard bottles, but they're not cardboard bottles, because the cardboard bottles with a plastic liner and a plastic lid, and that causes huge amounts of problems for the recycling sector, but actually causes bigger problems for the public, because they just don't know what to do, and they don't know whether there should be recycling or not. And you have any conversation around the dinner table at anybody's house, and as soon as they find out you've got anything to do with waste or recycling, the immediate question is, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm really confused. And that confusion leads to an utter lack of trust. So I think for the trust thing, we need to sort out the policy, and we also need to sort out the communications to the general public about recycling, because everybody wants to do it. There's a massive will, but we're losing trust because we keep telling people that they're doing it either wrongly or we're confusing the hell out of them.
I had a terrifying conversation with the managing director of a waste collection business, and his comment was, well, I've got a 25-year contract. It's going to roll for 25 years. Why am I going to change anything?
Yeah.
but but our recycling rates are appalling, and there's no incentive. So how is that going to change? And your point about responsibility and containment. How do we do that?
Absolutely, and we've the waste industry in the UK and in the world was very much around containment disposal, and we've now moved to containment and instead of landfilling waste, we're incinerating waste under this sort of crazy policy that it's green energy. It's not green energy, it's plastics that we're burning, and the plastic comes from oil, as we all know. And so we're not recycling because it's difficult. And recycling is difficult because the supply chain can do whatever it wants, and it can send out all these sort of different types of crazy packaging, which are harder to recycle. And so to get that change, there's a huge amount of focus on people's behavior. And I think this is misguided. And we blame individuals and we blame individual organizations, and we say, you need to try harder, you need to do something different. If you're buying a product that relies on a global supply chain, you've got no power at all as a consumer. And people say, well, you just spend your money differently. It's very difficult to do that. And that gets the big companies that are doing the vast majority of the polluting off the hook. And importantly, it gets the politicians off the hook as well. And we've got 30 years to get to net zero. In my opinion, we need to spend the next 10 years working out the policy framework and what we're going to do, and not blaming each other and saying, well, you're not plastic free, or you're plastic free, or you're a vegan and you should be a vegetarian, or vegetarian should be a vegan, and why are you only going meat free Monday? And we have this blame culture on everybody else, and it's just letting the people who need to be making the change off the hook and getting everything lined up in the next 5-10 years, and then seeing a step change in what we're trying to do is absolutely key, in my opinion. And it's absolutely the case for waste management and recycling. And at the moment, the government with the Environment Bill are going through the biggest change to waste policy in the last 25 years. And they're not taking the difficult decisions. They're sort of moving around saying we're going to put subsidies here and subsidies there. And what we need to do is get the policy that provides the stability that means that recycling works in the current economic frameworks. And that's the one thing that they're not doing. And it's very simple, which is, don't let recycled commodities swing around like virgin commodities. Put a baseline price in them that governments and policy stand behind. So if you're selling recycled polymer, it can never drop below a certain level, even if oil drops to $30 a barrel. And they're not making those decisions.
Yeah. It's such an obvious one, and there's lots of.
Sorry to interrupt, Mark. Somebody's just said, Sunny Ray Recycle says we need a national recycling scheme, all colours bin the same. Well, the good news, Sun Ray Recycling, is that is on the way with consistent collections, and it is actually the one thing that the government are, fingers crossed, going to get right. And in 23, I don't know why it's taking so long. In 2023, there will be for England and Wales, I believe. I think Scotland are going to follow doing the same thing. There is going to be something called consistent collection. So every council in the country has to provide the same core set of materials to get recycled in the same way. And it's either going to be 5 materials or 7 materials. The final list hasn't been agreed yet, but it'll be the same across the country. And that's one thing to getting people to understand that actually wherever they go, they can recycle glass bottles, plastic bottles, cans, whatever it is. So that is on the way.
And sorry, when is that coming in 2023?
I think it's 23 or 24. I've slightly lost track of the timing because of COVID. They've lost a year. The Environment Bill is going through Parliament at the moment. And once that goes through, there'll be a bit more clarity on the timing.
I mean, so that should fundamentally change the waste collection through all the local authorities, who all have the wriggle room to go, well, each county, each authority has a different collection regime, therefore they can find ways to hide.
Yeah. And guess what some of the councils are saying, or a lot of the councils are saying, and the big waste companies are saying? They say, well, I've got a 25-year contract to burn everything, therefore you need to buy me out of the contract if you want me to do this. So it's going to cost us. And so there's lots of embedded contracts to renegotiate, but we will get there with it because there is momentum around that. So it's really, really important. And that will then give people confidence, and it'll give the waste management sector confidence that they can actually invest in recycling infrastructure because they know they're going to get the feedstock coming in. It still doesn't negate the fact that we still have to have the pricing underwritten. I had 3 friends 8 years ago, that lost their recycling businesses, and they were all recycling plastics, and they're all doing everything that everybody wants today. And oil dropped from $110 a barrel to $35 a barrel. And all of the milk companies, Coca-Cola was one of their customers and suppliers that they were supplying, said, we're really sorry, we love your business plan, but we're going to buy virgin polymer from tomorrow because yours is too expensive. And now the oil price has dropped by 70%. We're going to buy virgin. And they all, bar none, went bust. And that can't be let to happen again.
I mean, it's a tough question, but it sounds like you and I have had this conversation before. There's a massive lack of infrastructure build in the waste collection sector, and it just beggars belief that we can send contaminated stuff to a third world country thinking, oh, they'll deal with it better than we can in a first world country. I mean, what is the quantum? What do you think the government needs to spend to try and be able to put the right infrastructure in place?
There's another one in from Sunray Recycling. Yeah, Veolia is one of the key suppliers to councils across the country, so they'll definitely be looking to find a way of renegotiating the contracts. So I suggest you ask Veolia specifically about your council, but they're definitely one of the key suppliers, so they will be wanting to renegotiate the terms of their contract. The infrastructure issue is, we get asked about this a lot actually, the private sector, the private equity, the ESG community are falling over themselves to invest in UK recycling and reprocessing infrastructure, but they find it very difficult and risky to make the investment case because it's more expensive to produce a recycled commodity, quite often, particularly polymers, because there isn't one type of plastic. Therefore, they need to see some price stability. And if we get price stability in the market, either through underpinning polymer prices, or if you look at it in a more holistic level, putting a financial mechanism on carbon, that opens the gateway to billions of pounds worth of investment. So getting the investment in the infrastructure is not an issue if the policy framework is right. And we have to let the market, in my opinion, you have to let the market work and let the economics in the market work, but you have to get a benefit, a financial benefit for taking the risk around recycling and working in the circular economy, because it's nascent, it's new. There are risks. There's very little risk to taking oil and converting it into polymer, because we've been doing it for 50, 60 years at scale, and it's a very consistent feedstock. Whereas taking multiple different types of polymer, waste polymer plastics, separating them, cleaning, washing them, and getting them back into a recycled pellet is got higher cost and more risks.
Yeah, I mean, the government pays lots of money to support the oil industry. It'd be interesting to know what that percentage is and what that would equate to in a recycling business, and what that generates back from a carbon reduction perspective.
Yeah, I mean, we're sort of trying not to get too political about this stuff, but the government bias towards the linear economy is just astounding, really. I mean, there's the thing in the press last week that the ministers have met fossil fuel companies 10 times more than renewable companies. There was a big announcement 10 days ago that the government are putting 500 million into innovative supply chain solutions for the renewable grid over 5 years. That's 500 million over 5 years. And I thought, well, that doesn't sound that much. So I Googled it. We spend 470 million a year filling in potholes on roads. It's not a serious amount of money. It's not a serious amount of money. And it's the same in the recycling sector. It's the same in these green sectors. And we really need the politicians to take it seriously in terms of where we're heading. Otherwise, we're just not going to get change. We're not going to get change, because everything that's announced is a drop in the ocean compared to everything that goes into the linear economy, which is massively reliant on fossil fuels and massively reliant on make it, use it, throw it away, and then it conveniently disappears by being incinerated or buried in the ground.
one of my gripes, I mean, HS2, I have no issues with HS2. What I have an issue with is it started off on a $40 billion project or £1 billion project. It's now at 110.
Yeah.
And they're spending 110 billion on a train line. And, we're talking about 500 million, which is a fraction of a fraction on renewable energy. So there's kind of priorities. I mean, within government, are you seeing this starting to, the lights starting to come on? Do you deal with them much, or is it still private sector trying to drive change?
Well, it's interesting, really, because the waste is a massively politicized arena, particularly at the local area. And the saying goes that you vote for whether we go to war or not in the Middle East at a general election, or more recently whether we leave Europe or not in a general election, and then you vote for a weekly rubbish collection in your local election. And as we saw with the Greens coming to power in Germany in 1985, that was a lot around waste management and recycling. So weirdly, it is at the local level, a massively politicized area, waste management and recycling. But if you step back and look at what's been talked around in terms of how we're going to get to net zero, there's a disproportionate amount of politics, if you like, or spending or attention on energy, which is about a third of CO2 emissions, and transport, which is about 17-18% of CO2 emissions. And we just talk all the time about energy and transport. And what we're not talking about is heating and cooling. And the biggest emitter of carbon dioxide is the things that we make. And the third is the things that we grow and eat. But the biggest emitter is the things that we make. And that's all about the circular economy, but it gets a tiny amount of airtime and a tiny amount of political attention, because everyone's just focused on renewable energy. And yes, we need more energy because we're going to electrify the economy, but not at the cost of everything else.
So I think the answer is no.
That's just no. But it's really interesting. I mean, you look at something like sand and gravel, which everyone sort of takes it for granted and think, we're not going to run out of sand and gravel. We're already running out of sand and gravel. So, concrete is 70% sand and gravel. We've globally exhausted all the easy places to get sand and gravel. So we're now dredging at the seabed. And in doing so, we're destroying ecosystems that provide vital ecosystem services that we don't understand about. And then you've got organizations saying, we have found a brilliant way of making, it's one of Bill Gates's companies, we can make cement and concrete by firing sunbeams at a furnace and making, zero carbon renewable concrete. You can't if you don't have any sand. So, that's the sort of example of where just focusing on one part of the entire resources that we consume is unhelpful.
Yeah, I mean, the circularity thinking, it's something that needs to be embedded. I mean, one of the conversations I had around education is, why is this not being embedded at a really early age so people understand the interconnectedness of everything, which doesn't, certainly with my kids, that doesn't come through at school. So, a couple of other questions. I mean, I asked Nigel Topping yesterday. I said, if you had a magic wand, what would you like to get out of COP? And he said, stupid question. That's not going to happen. And then he landed up answering it and said, well, if I had Dumbledore's wand, I would like to see, effectively alignment. Magic wand in the waste industry. What do you think, or what are the kind of the easy wins, the things that we can do?
I think if I was going to, I'll sort of give my magic wand example initially, I suppose, is, and I did think about this, is that, COVID's been very tragic for a lot of people, and distressing for everybody. But we've talked about it a hell of a lot, and everyone is still talking about it a lot. if I was going to wave my wand, it would be to get everyone talking about the climate emergency as much as they did about COVID-19. And people don't talk about it enough, and people don't hardly talk about it at all. But, you know, you go and see friends or whatever, and everybody's talking in the bar or at dinner about COVID-19, and nobody's really talking about the climate and the climate emergency. And I think that's largely because of environmentalists, and I include myself in that as well, because we have made it depressing and quite sort of doom-laden and full of despair. And environmentalists have said, you've got, up until this point, environmentalists have said, you've got to make sacrifices to make change, and we're going to take things away from you. Nobody wants things being taken away from them. And so I think at COP26, you know, the IPCC have been talking about agency and urgency, and that's to take action, and we need to take action quickly. But I don't think we should be taking things away from people quickly. I think we need to show people that there is a fantastic future, and we need to bring people along on that journey. Because if we just say to people, it's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult, and things are going to get taken away from you, we're never going to bring people on that journey. And it's sort of why I like there's this movement called solar punks, solar punk, and it's artists and sort of cultural writers who are writing about green utopias. And I quite like their work, because they're saying, you know, you can have all these things happening in the future, and this is what the future might look like, and it's all very fantastical and fantasy laden. But it's brilliant, because they're not saying we're going to take things away from them. They say things are going to be better and things are going to look good in the future. And I think we need to move towards that. And at the moment, we're very much in this blame game and finger pointing game, and you know, people saying, well, you know, you're a vegetarian, why aren't you a vegan? Or I've gone plastics free, what have you gone plastics free? These are all like relatively small behavioral things, and we're not going to solve a systems problem by getting a few people to change behavior. And we need to get the systems to change, and that's what we need COP to do. And they should really just be talking exclusively about pricing carbon, because that's what needs to get fixed. That would be my opinion.
So systems change and a price for carbon, which will then underpin pretty much everything.
Yeah, and talking about a positive future.
Take people on the journey.
Yeah, because nobody's engaged around the environment. You know, if you compare pandemic to environment, and a lot more people are going to die because of climate change, it's incomparable. As you know, there's probably like 5 or 10% of the population talking about climate change, climate emergency. It feels like more to us because we're in that sector, but in reality, it's not. Most people want to, you know, just continue as they are because it's nice. Yeah.
So solar punks, I haven't heard of them. I will look them up. What other suggestions do you have around reading, listening, things to take us on the journey?
So the best book out at the moment on climate change, in my opinion, is The New Climate War by Michael E. Mann. It's fantastic, and his whole shtick is about systems change and moving the focus away from beating people up with this sort of, why aren't you behaving differently, when we need to change the systems and we need to change the politics. And I think I'd recommend that if anyone's interested in reading books around climate change, I'd definitely recommend Michael E. Mann's book. It's fantastic. Podcasts, I mean, I just love John Richardson and the Future Noughts. He's, you know, John Richardson's comedian, and the Future Noughts are sort of future thinking consultants, and they're just brilliantly funny, talking about all sorts of things in the future. So they're good and light-hearted. Definitely listen to them.
That's great. I mean, both of those I've not heard of, so that's one of the benefits of being on this side of the camera when it works is to write all these things down and stick them in my phone.
Exactly.
Yeah, when that starts to work too. the future north. Awesome. I mean, are you going to COP? Will you be there?
I won't be there, no, unfortunately. But I think my message to people there, I mean, I sort of talked about the messages as well, but I think there's an interesting dynamic, because I've always sort of said that we'll notice climate change when it really hits the people hard, and I don't think it has yet. And you know that although the natural environment is changing, it's changing relatively slowly. I mean, I think we're going to see an increased propensity of natural disasters, but they're sort of short, sharp shocks, and people tend to forget quickly. But I think we'll really start to see big change when we start to see humanitarian catastrophes as a result of climate change. And I think at COP26, we're going to hopefully see some urgency around these issues, because the people who are affected most by climate change aren't the people that are in the UK in nice temperate climates. They're the people who are living on the edges of the environment in sub-Saharan Africa and other places. And when we get millions of people on the move because their environments have become inhospitable, then we've got a real issue on our hands that's potentially going to obviously affect the people that can't find food, but it is going to affect everybody else as well. And it's sort of trying to find these trigger points where you actually get the world leaders to listen about it. And it's very easy to ignore climate change in many ways, because it's sort of the science of, you know, the whole planet's changing. And, you know, if you get the deniers like the Trumps, thank God he's gone, you know, they go, well, you know, there's really good positive things because it's going to get warmer or it's going to get nicer in certain areas. But those humanitarian issues are going to be very challenging, I think, in the next, you know, decade or two.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness Trump has gone, and the sense is that, you know, the fact that the Queen and the Pope is also turning up to COP, you get the feeling that everybody's now taking this seriously. What is interesting, one of the interesting things that's coming through is that more and more and more NGOs are starting to align behind the fact that we need to go on this journey, versus, you know, elbows out and trying to manage their own institutions. So I think your point about stop blaming everybody, I think that's absolutely genius. We need consistency, confidence, and urgency.
And I think, you know, the good thing is I think the brands and companies are starting to get on board with this. They're pretty confused at the moment, but they're actually now starting to think, you know, how do I move towards a circular economy? How do I do my bit around the climate change? And, you know, social media in particular, as soon as somebody does something, someone starts attacking them and saying, well, no, you can't do that, and all the rest of it. And actually, getting to net zero we're not just going to go from here to net zero. There's so many problems to solve. There's so many issues to get over, and we have to keep making decisions. We have to keep trying. We're going to make bad decisions. We're going to go into cul-de-sacs. I mean, anyone who's set up a business and run, you know, Mark, it's not, people sit there and go, oh, well, you've got a brilliant business. It must have been great, you know, but you just make so many mistakes along the way. And we need to let people make mistakes, and we need to let people experiment, and we need to end up, you know, accepting that we've gone down a cul-de-sac and it's a disaster and not going to work. But just sitting here and saying, well, you know, oil works and we're going to sit here with the linear economy because it works and it's safe, isn't an option anymore. And I think anybody who's willing to have a go at doing things differently should be massively supported rather than attacked for it. And whether that's Coca-Cola, Unilever, you know, any of these brands who are, you know, historically associated with, you know, causing damage, if they're having a go, let them have a go, and let's see where we get to with it and support them. Yeah. It's like it or not, you know, they're massive companies. They're going to be here to stay, and therefore we need them to get on the circular economy journey, not just sort of attack them and say, you know, it's bad. And, you know, people on social media and environmentalists on social media are very good at attacking everybody else just because it's not a perfect utopian circular economy, you know. And even I've seen things come out of, you know, organisations like Ellen MacArthur Foundation where it said recycling is not that important, for example, which I found very upsetting, because actually it's a stepping stone. Yes, if you're in a utopia, you won't need recycling, you know, waste management or redundance, it's end of pipe, but we need it, and need it massively, and need it to be massively supported to get to the ultimate goal of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, you starting a business is super hard, and there's lots of stumbling blocks. And I think one of the challenges that I'm trying to get my head around is innovation usually comes from the weirdest places. It comes from out of the blue, and in mostly unstructured environments. And once you've got that spark, you need funding and support. And usually the people that have the spark don't know where to get the funding or to get the support before it can then scale. And it's how do we wrap some kind of infrastructure around people who are being disruptive, who are being creative, who can kind of bring that technology to scale, or to people who can then scale it. That's also a challenge. Anyway, Bruce, as always, brilliant to speak to you. Super inspiring. Huge apologies for the disaster that was me and my phone and technology that's designed for young people. But I think just stop blaming everybody is brilliant. Clearly, you need circular thinking. We need consistency. We need confidence, and agency and urgency. Really, really, really important. And I will download Michael Eman's book immediately.
Yeah, Mark, I'd just like to say thank you. And I think what you're doing on this is fantastic. And transposing it into the book and taking it to COP26, absolutely brilliant. And I think, really, really well done for doing that. I think it's fantastic. And I hope you get to sit in between the Queen and the Pope.
I don't have a ticket, so I'll be handing them over the
throwing them in. You can drop them in with your electric drone. But no, that's I think it's highly commendable. So really great initiative, and if I can help in any way, let me know.
Bruce, thank you very much. Great to talk to you.
Great. All right, Mark, take care. Have a good day. Thanks.
Thank you. You too. Bye.